Welcome to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito from Private Vista. In this podcast, we draw from years of experience as well as guest specialists to help you create the life you imagine. Join us in this journey as we enlighten and empower you to align your lifestyle to help you achieve your goals with a clear picture of your future. Now, let's get to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Dollars and Cents podcast with your hostess, Nicole Romito. Nicole, good to be with you again. I always enjoy our time together. How are you?
I'm doing great, Bill. I too always get super excited when I see your name on my calendar for the day. So looking forward to our time together.
Me too. I very much am. But what are we talking about today?
Yeah, today we're going to talk about a topic that is on the more serious side, which in my personal opinion, I think it makes it a more important one because I have found that people don't want to deal with what we're going to talk about until really they're in the throes of it. And what we're going to talk about is what to do when a loved one suddenly dies. And to help have the conversation, I have one of my colleagues in studio with me. Hi, Delaney. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so it's good for our listeners who have been longtime listeners. You may recognize Delaney. She was on another podcast about why wealth management is a welcoming career for women. So if you didn't have a chance to listen to that episode, I do suggest that you check that one out as well. But just so our listeners know a little bit about Delaney, she is one of my colleagues. We have been working together since 2015. And fun fact, listeners, Private Vista is the only place that Delaney has worked since she graduated from college. So that's super cool.
Yeah, it's been a very fun 9 years.
Yes, it has. I can't believe it's been that long already. I remember your first day.
So do I.
Yeah. But yeah, so Delaney graduated from Virginia Tech. She has a degree in financial planning. She quickly earned the CFP designation once she had been working with us. Currently, her role, she is a senior advisor. She plans to continue growing in her career and is working towards becoming a partner one day at the firm, which is super exciting. She loves helping our clients align their finances with all of the things that help bring them joy in life. And Delaney, while I know you get a lot of joy out of working with our clients, I know also on the personal side, you have a couple special people who bring you joy. Do you want to kind of share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have an almost 2-year-old now. Her name is Mila. She turns 2 in August, and time is absolutely flying by. My husband, Danny, and I have really enjoyed the last year and a half with her. It's just been such a life-changing experience. So we're really enjoying that.
Yeah, that's great. And I will tell you, listeners, I've had the pleasure of meeting Milan a few times, and she is one adorable kid and definitely has her mom's personality.
We were hoping maybe she'd be more calm, cool, and collected like my husband, but
not so
turns
much.
out she's got the competitive edge that I have, as well as the big aggressive personality.
Oh, Danny, our heart is with you. So with that, Delaney and I are going to have a good conversation today. And for our listeners, we do want to kind of start off with is we understand that this is a very sensitive topic. But as I mentioned, what we're hoping to do is share some experiences and some things to consider so that if you do find yourself in this situation where clearly you're going to be overwhelmed with grief, probably just, feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, trying to figure out all the things that need to be done. So our goal really is to inform you and, just really, I think the key thing, Delaney, would you agree, is you don't have to go through it alone.
That's exactly right, Nicole, because I think when something like this happens and you are suddenly without that loved one, anytime you're trying to get online and do the research, that seems to be very formal, very transactional almost.
Right.
And it's our goal to make our listeners know that when we're dealing with these situations, it's more about the care of the survivor and how to let them know that we don't think of them as just a transaction. This is something that we want to walk through with them and help in every facet that we can.
Yes. And I know we did intentionally say a sudden loss of a loved one, because it certainly could be a spouse or a partner. It could be a parent. It could be another close family member, such as a grandparent, or, I know you're a parent, Delaney, but God forbid if a child, if you lose a child. So it's not just thinking of like a spouse or partner from that capacity, but everything we're going to share can really hopefully be applied, or you'll find use for it regardless of the relationship you have with the loved one.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I do find when you're in this moment and you're doing this research, it does tend to lean a lot towards the loss of a spouse. But
Right.
I went through this pretty recently. My mom had actually been living with my grandfather, just the two of them, for about 15 years, and he passed away. Although we knew he was aging, it really doesn't matter at what phase of life it happens. It's
Right.
never easy. Even if you knew it was coming or someone was ill, it does not make it any easier going through these moments. So when we are able to help and guide people through it, that's kind of the best part of what we do.
Yeah, I agree. And I know, you mentioned you lost your grandfather. My mom passed away. I can't believe it's coming up on 8 years now. And, I just remember helping my dad go through that. He handled the finances and things like that, but it still was, you're gripped by grief and just an incredible level of sadness that it's almost impossible, certainly at certain moments or certain days, to be able to even worry about rational things or think about them from a clear perspective.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's why we want to gear this podcast towards someone who might be going through this now and give a couple of key
Yes.
tips, someone who maybe knows someone going through this now, or if you're listening, this is going to be a good prep call for if you envision that you're going to go through something like this.
Right. So, okay. So we've talked a little bit about why we think this is an important topic. Why don't we? I think one of the things we wanted to hit on was, establishing your key person.
This is a term that I think is really, really important. So, what I would tell you in some of the experiences I've had going through this with clients and even in our personal life, Google is great at a lot of things, Nicole, but I'll tell you right now, it's not the best when someone's grieving because it's not going to give you that warm feeling you need when you're going through something like this. So rather than using a Google or the internet as your main source for resources behind what to do in this situation, we find establishing a key person is really important. So I can give a good example of what I mean by this. So I had a client who his key person happened to be his accountant.
Okay.
So both him and his wife knew that if something happened to the other, the accountant gets the first phone call, right? So he called his accountant when his wife passed. And although they knew it was coming, she had been sick for many years, that you never know when, he calls the accountant and the accountant actually directed him to us, to Private Vista, and said, you really need to get in touch with these people here at Private Vista because they experience this a lot. They can help you go through the whole process because you're grieving. You don't need to be dealing with all of this. Why don't you find some key person that can help?
So this was the story that you're sharing is about someone who you weren't already working with.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay.
And
so I think that's important to note for our listeners. It's okay if you don't have maybe your key person identified today, or you have your key person, but then I think what you're going to share is even though you didn't know the client before their spouse died, you quickly became probably the key person or certainly a key person on the team.
Exactly. And this key person, when you're thinking of who it should be, it could be any range of people. So it could be a family member, it could be a professional person like an estate planning attorney, a CPA, someone like us, a financial advisor. It's really more about leaning on someone in that instant moment where you're going to need it most. So identifying that person would probably be step one if you're going through the loss of a loved one.
Okay. All right. And I do think that the takeaway on this one is it doesn't have to be a professional advisor as your key person. You're going to want professional advisors so you make sure everything gets done correctly for the surviving person. But it could be for those of, I think the listeners know, like I'm single, I don't have children. As I mentioned, my mom has passed on, my dad is getting up in age, and I have one sister, but they both live out of state. So even for where I'm kind of advancing up in life, I should say, is that evaluating. I mean, a couple of my key people who are local are friends.
Yep.
Now, they both happen to be attorneys, which did lead part of my decision for choosing them, but just want to kind of share. It doesn't have to kind of think outside the box.
Absolutely. I can even share on my own personal side because Nicole and I are in a position where we do get to plan these things out and we're not in that suddenly loss of a loved one situation. But in one of the people of my team, one of my key persons is actually a coworker here at Private
Right.
Vista.
Exactly. So that's interesting. You mentioned that because on the financial side of things, I have two of my partners as well, because I'm
Exactly.
like, they already know the lay of the land. So this will be, of course, they'll be completely overcome with grief at my passing. But
Absolutely.
they already know the financial side. So, all right. Was there anything else you wanted to add on if you haven't yet identified your key person, like attributes or how to think about it?
Absolutely. So I think it really should be someone that is not only trustworthy, organized is a really key component of a quality we're looking for in that key person, but it should be someone who has the capacity to do so. I probably wouldn't immediately think of my sister-in-law as my key person in an instance like this because she already has 2 young children and she has a full-time job.
Right.
And she does a lot. So I have a hard time wanting to place extra burden on that situation. Whereas I have plenty of people in my life that I know have the time capacity to actually help me deal with something like this if I had suddenly lost my husband.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so once we have, once our listeners have either determined their key person or key people, what would be the next step you would suggest that they think about?
Yeah. So the next thing that you would want to do with this key person, so you're not doing this alone. Now you have support, right? So we've established the key person. They're going to help with this next step. The next step can sometimes feel overwhelming. So having support to do it is important. The next piece in the next phase is really creating a few checklists. So think of things like you're going to need a full financial portfolio checklist. So if you have multiple bank accounts, brokerage accounts, you want to start getting a list of what we have all in one place if we don't already have that. So that's going to be one of the really important pieces. Call it checklist number 1. You're also going to want to identify estate planning documents that have already been established. So this could then potentially give more clarity on what the person who passed would want for in their will. Think of final arrangements types of things, because building off of that checklist, now you're going to have a steady foundation of how to get things done. So planning the funeral, and now you have support to do it. And then kind of the nitty gritty of it is you might have been the non-financial person in the relationship.
Okay.
And now household bills are going to fall on you. So it's getting an outline of what bills were already being paid, what was being paid automatically, what did potentially that financial person do in the household to pay bills that were not being paid automatically. It's really going to be making sure that the house can still run, even with the loss of your loved one.
Right. Because I think on the finance side, well, on kind of on all the to-dos, there's a couple that need to be done immediately. So you mentioned, the final arrangements. And I know I had a friend who their parent recently died, and they had made arrangements for a traditional, viewing and funeral and things like that. And they had that all set up. And then they found the will in the safe deposit box, and they were like, oh, Dad wanted to be cremated. And so they found it before all that, but they had to quickly pivot and do everything they could to carry out Dad's last wishes.
Yeah, I've even seen as fun and entertaining in a will as having your ashes placed into a firework. If you hadn't found the will in time, you might not have been able to uphold that request.
Right.
So it is important to try to get those documents all in place before moving too fast, I would say.
Right.
And estate settlements, they do take some time. And I think it's always important to remember it doesn't have to get done tomorrow.
Right. Right.
You have time. There's a few things that you'll want to push to the top of the list. So a good example of something you might want to get done sooner rather than later, contacting Social Security or a pension if someone was already receiving benefits.
Okay.
That's one of those things that can be kind of a pain if a deposit has hit after the date of death, now you have to find a way to return it. It starts to become more complex. So that's one of the things that gets bumped to the top of the list, whereas certain topics may be okay to delay a little.
Exactly. And I think the other one too, one that has to go on is, like you said, running the household. So understanding, making sure the utilities and the cable and your Medicare premiums or health insurance premiums, things like that, where you want to just make sure at least that all the baseline stuff is taken care of.
Yeah. And to that point, Nicole, a really helpful tip in these moments where we say don't move too fast.
Yes.
So unless your bank account is titled jointly, let's just say in this instance, your loved one has passed and their bank account was just titled to their name.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't rush to tell the bank quite yet, because they will freeze the assets the
Right.
moment you let them know that someone has passed and the account was titled in their name.
Yes.
So all of those bills that might have been automatically set to pay from that account are not going to get paid. And then
Right.
that's going to be something you'll have to go backwards and make sure everything gets paid appropriately. So they're probably not the first place that we want to inform of someone's passing. They are on the list, but not the
Right.
first.
Not number one.
Exactly.
So, okay. I think a couple other things too, you mentioned like Social Security and the pension. Since you did mention the bank account, is also understanding or seeing if there is any life insurance policies.
Exactly. That'll fall right under the financial aspect. So any life insurance policies, you'll want to get those claims started, because that's something that's going to come back and help you as the survivor. We would say that's one of the more important pieces to get started.
Yeah, especially because it could be a sizable amount of cash being infused into your situation. And one thing that we have both seen and found is if you don't, especially if you were the unengaged spouse around the finances, and you really have no idea like how much money do I need to run the household, or funerals or whatnot are not inexpensive. So knowing you have that cash infusion coming, we can see it's alleviated some level of the anxiety or unknown for that person.
Absolutely. And then I think the other important piece to this, one of the places you'll want to go sooner rather than later, is Social Security actually does have benefits for surviving spouses and for spouses who may have a child under the age of 16. So there are multiple benefits that Social Security provides if you happen to find yourself in a surviving spouse situation. Your minor child could actually get benefits until their age 18, and you can get benefits as, we'll call it, the head of household until your child's age 16. So that's two forms of income stream that you'll want to get started, because it's, again, going to alleviate some of that stress that you're feeling in a really big moment of grief.
Yeah, that's a great point, because especially with those benefits provided under Social Security, you literally are leaving money on the table.
Exactly.
If you don't file for them.
Hey, pardon the interruption. I know you are listening to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, and we're happy you're here. If you have any questions, please head over to myprivatevista.com or the show notes to find out how to reach us. We'd love to hear from you.
Do you want to talk on maybe like passwords or digital assets or digital accounts?
Since this is becoming way more prevalent than it might have been even 15 years ago, 10 years ago, there should be a place where someone keeps all of their passwords. I know some people like to keep it on a loose leaf sheet of paper,
Right.
but there typically is one place where a lot of passwords live. That would be important. And this is one of those things that goes back to, if you have time to plan this out, you'll want to be able to touch base with your loved one and say, if something happens to you, where is your main password? And then, because it's going to be very difficult to get into someone's social media. So upon the passing of a loved one, Facebook won't let you log into their account. There's a lot of restrictions out there on getting those types of things. So finding the password spreadsheet, as I'll call it, is pretty important.
Yeah, I would agree. I do agree. So I think we've talked about that. So kind of as a quick recap, get your key people together, get your checklist. So you're kind of getting your arms around what are all the different moving parts, whether it's income streams like a pension or an annuity or Social Security benefits. don't notify the bank right off the bat, especially if the account is only titled in the person's name who has just died, because that will then, it will cut you off for a period of time from being able to access those funds. Try to get life insurance policy claims in sooner than later, because then that gets that much more at a faster pace, getting additional cash into your hands.
The next piece too, that kind of where you're going with this, I think is, as we mentioned before, having support from that key person. There will be another key person if it's not already you in this phase where you're gathering your checklist, and that's going to be the executor of the estate. So if, let's say, it's not a spouse that passes, or even if it is and someone else is named as executor,
Okay.
you're now going to be working with that person, your own key person that we've kind of said is your real support team for you. And the three of you at this point are really going to start driving what's the next step. So the executor is going to be in charge of making sure everything that's in the will is being followed. So they're one of the people that you'll want to notify pretty quickly if someone has passed.
Yes. Okay. And also too, I know some states, at least we're here in Illinois, that you actually have to file an original copy of the will with the state or the county that
Exactly.
the person
So
passed
you would
in?
do it with the county actually. And when someone passes, there's only ever one will. So you may have a copy of the one will, but if you've ever updated your will, you can't file an old will. It has to be the most recent. And typically you'll see the original or the older will be destroyed. So there's ever only one
Okay.
will. Whereas, for instance, if you're listening and you have a trust document, that can be amended along the way. A will typically doesn't get amended, it's scratched and restarted.
Okay.
So that's what will get filed.
Okay. And that'll be good, I think, to have those documents so you know, as you said, who is the executor, if you have a trust, who is the successor trustee? Because one thing, there's so many documents out there, and it's, I think, a common misunderstanding or misconception. You may also have powers of attorney, right? So
exactly.
do you want to maybe talk a little bit about what happens with the powers of attorney when the person dies?
Yep. So we've talked a little bit about what the executor will do. The other two facets are powers of attorney. So those typically are going to be while someone is living. So the power of attorney for healthcare and the power of attorney for property in Illinois is going to be something that might go in force if someone becomes incapacitated. So as we've talked about before, some circumstances, maybe your loved one was sick for a long period of time and we knew eventually that they would pass, but we're still in that point of they might be incapacitated to make decisions. That's when a power of attorney will really come into play. But upon their passing, those two documents aren't going to reflect what's going to be happening moving forward.
Right. The power dies with the person
Exactly.
who had appointed the power to the power of attorney.
Yes. And then the last person that we'd want to incorporate in all of this, potentially being a different person, is the trustee of a trust. So if assets are titled to a trust, that trustee is responsible for distributing the trust assets in the language of the trust. So for example, if you had left Nicole in your situation, your trust says my sister gets 100% of my assets that are titled to the trust. Your trustee upon your passing is responsible for making sure your sister gets those assets.
Right. Okay. All right. So I think we've talked a little bit about the logistics. What about, even though Delaney and I were numbers gals, if you will, and that is an important part of what we bring to the table when we're working with clients. But we both know, like you shared at the kind of the top of the episode, we both have had big losses on the personal side. And certainly I would say your mom and my dad, they were fortunate that they could lean on us to figure out all the dollars and cents of it as we've just kind of gone through. It's so much more than that, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you what have you seen or how have you helped your loved ones or your clients? Why don't we share a little bit about how we've added value on that side? Because that's just as important, if not more.
Oh, 100%. So even preparing for this podcast and coming up with our own, call it private Vista tips when something like this happens, self-care had to be in the top 3 tips because sometimes it starts to feel so transactional and it's very easy to get bogged down in these moments where you're just trying to get everything done. But the self-care aspect when you're going through something like this is just, it's vital, because not only is this affecting you in the moment, it's affecting everyone around you. And when you're in a healthier place, it's going to help the whole situation from every person involved. So we think that self-care truly does need to be one of your top priorities when you're going through something like this. So one of the things that we talk about here is finding a support system, because while that key person is going to be helping you through all, like you said, the dollars, the cents, the numbers, the support system needs to be someone. And sometimes it's even helpful to have a third party here, be someone that can emotionally support you as well, as you've now got your financial support. So this can be anyone from a grief counselor, a therapist. If you like group settings, you can do group counseling, because that's the one beautiful thing about humanity is we're all in this together.
Right.
So finding people that are going through what you're experiencing, you'll never have someone that knows exactly how you feel, but they might be in a similar situation and they might be able to provide you with something that you didn't know you needed. So we find that finding that help, that emotional support is really, really important.
Yes, I would agree. And one thing I think that's made it easier to access therapist or a grief counselor or even support groups is, you can certainly go in person, but you can also do it. A lot of them offer it over Zoom
Yep.
or over the phone.
Yes, that is a new benefit to technology that we're starting to see. And it's day or night. There are some places that are 24/7.
Right.
So you can get that support whenever fits your schedule.
Yeah, exactly. And you might feel, even just starting out, if you're like, oh, they're not going to feel this way, or I'm not comfortable sharing my feelings. A good first step might be doing something either over the phone or even if it's in a group setting and you're all on Zoom, you're not physically in the same room with them. You have a little bit of anonymity, if you will.
Exactly. And I do think that that's an important piece to this topic to bring up, is that there's still, for some reason, a little bit of stigma behind reaching out for help.
Right.
People tend to not want to do that. And the problem with not reaching out for help is now you might be relying really heavily on friends and family
Yep.
for the emotional side, right? So what you tend to see happen is, although your friends and family will always love you and always be there for you, you're now taking an emotional toll on them and they're starting to feel it. Whereas it's something that could have been more beneficial to reach out to a third party, actually even an unbiased third party too, because there's going to be a lot of emotion there. And when you're leaning so heavily on friends and family, that's where you could see resentment build for different reasons. It's really important to have different types and different avenues of where you can release your grief.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you and I both have said to clients, when they start getting into the more mental health side of things, clearly we're empathetic, sympathetic, but that's not what you and I went to school for. I always say I had one psychology class, so I can tell you about the hierarchy of needs and Maslow's dogs.
Right.
But I mean, I'm a very empathetic person, but I don't have the training or the tools to I would say effectively help them
Exactly.
process the grief and all the feelings that may come up for them. Because while we've kind of have highlighted, well, they're sad, or you could take grief as I'm sad. I know we both have seen anger or
Mhm.
resentment, as you mentioned. It's a whole range of emotions that come
Absolutely.
up.
Absolutely. I know, just even from personal experience, when someone is a primary caregiver too,
Right.
that tends to be really difficult on your emotional state. I watched my mom go through it for a long time.
Yeah.
And although she had help from her siblings, that wasn't the best place to get her emotional support, because she was the one who was living with him. So she was constantly there.
Yep.
They lived either in other states or, they weren't there every single day. They did a lot, but they weren't there
Right.
every day. They weren't, I'll call it, in the trenches, right? So her being able to find emotional support outside of just her family and friends was really important.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. So to kind of summarize, we've talked about I think our three takeaways are: establish your key person. And then we also talked about it's probably going to be, build out to a team, create your checklists, And then we just kind of wrapped up on self-care. So even though you have a lot of to-dos and a lot of logistics, you have to take care of yourself as a person. And I'll just add on that. I know we talked a lot about the emotional side, but physically as well.
Absolutely.
You've seen people like maybe they start to do some bad habits or, so there's a lot of coping strategy. I don't know if strategy is the right word, but there's different ways to cope where it may not be the healthiest choice. So we're not judging anyone by any means, but it is not only on the emotional side, but physical.
Yep. So I think one of the big things that some of the people I've seen go through grief like this will tell you is exercise gives you endorphins.
Right.
Endorphins make you happy.
Yes.
So if you can find an outlet that you enjoy on the physical side, just to get your body moving, such an important part of the self-care aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point. Was there anything else that you wanted to make sure that you shared with our listeners today?
I would tell you, I think it's really, really important that if you haven't yet found that person, if you're going through this now and you haven't found that key person, you can always start with a group like us. I think it's just vital to find someone who can be empathetic and who can understand what you're going through, who has maybe seen it once or twice now in their career, right?
Right.
So I would say anybody who's experiencing the loss of a loved one and needs help, our doors are always open.
Yes. And I do find just like the story you shared about the client, it was their CPA who referred the client to Private Vista. Hopefully, whoever you start with as your key person, they're going to have either the names in their Rolodex or kind of they can reach out to their network to say, let's start here. Or like they said, you need to bring in someone from Private Vista. They've been through this before.
Exactly.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming back into the studio and sharing a little bit more of your wisdom with our listeners. I appreciate you.
Of course. I know that my topic today probably wasn't what everybody wants to jump into a podcast for, but it was important to me because I think it's, like you said before, really important. It's a topic that when someone doesn't want to talk about, it's probably the most important thing to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. And even though you and I, as financial planners, generally when people are hiring us, it's because they're like, hey, we're hoping life's going to go all according to plan and then some on the positive side. And people love having those conversations. But even when people come to us during that situation, a big part of our process and conversations is let's talk about the what ifs.
Yep.
What if only one of you was here tomorrow? What if both of you got hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow? So it's just part of planning.
Yep.
And it's part of life. And there's really few things that are guaranteed in life, but death and taxes are two of them.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So with that, thank you again. And I didn't go back and listen to what your prior answer was, but if you could live anywhere in the world, no constraints with time, money, needing to be in your family, schools for Mila, whatnot, where would you live and why?
So I have tweaked my answer from the first time.
Okay.
So the very first time I answered this, it's truly, I just wanted to be on some beach somewhere because living on the beach would be my ideal lifestyle.
Love.
Well, now what I'll tell you is my Pinterest has been flooded with tiny homes.
Oh,
So I don't know if you've seen a lot on the building of tiny homes, but my new answer is I'd maybe like to have 3 tiny homes on 3 different beaches that I pop around to.
Oh, I thought maybe one for you, one for Danny, one for Mila. I was like, oh,
No,
I
I'm
know
gonna
she is
keep Danny.
too, but okay.
But I think the tiny home thing is kind of calling to me. So
I love it. I was just out with friends for dinner last night, and I swear to you, we were talking about tiny homes.
they're getting popular.
They are.
They're pretty fun.
A friend of mine grew up on a big lake in Indiana, and she's like, hey, they're selling the whole campground. We could buy 23 acres. And then we were like, we can all have our own tiny home on that.
Exactly.
So that is a small world or great minds,
Yep,
right?
I'm going to go great minds because I think the tiny home is that's where my future's at.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thanks again.
Tiny homes. I'm sitting here having a claustrophobic attack. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, we'll cobble together like 3 tiny homes for you.
Well, Delaney might find a tiny home really tiny when her adorable 2-year-old becomes a 3-year-old. So, we should check in with her.
Well,
Again.
that's why, Bill, I thought she was going to have 3 homes so everyone could have their own space.
Yeah, I know. I was with you. I thought,
I'm like,
yeah,
oh,
I
okay.
was with you, Nicole. Is good. This was a really important conversation, a really good conversation. And as you noted, Nicole, death and taxes are absolute certainties.
Yep.
But we don't like talking about this stuff. We don't want to talk about this stuff. And it's going to happen at some point or another. It always is really powerful. It is overwhelming. And the only 2 cents I would add to this is that grief is personal. And I've known people who have grieved short periods of times. And then I know a person who's a family member who lost a daughter unexpectedly when she was 21. And that's been 8 years now, and she's not done grieving and may not ever be done with grieving.
Right.
And it's okay. It's okay. But it's also okay to tell yourself life goes on. And you've got to go on with that life. So I really like the idea of involving people like yourself and Delaney so that you've got a rock that you can come to and be guided during those times of when things are colored.
Right.
There's just no other way around it. Things are deeply, profoundly colored by it. Speaking of which, if anybody who's listening to this podcast wants to reach out to you or Delaney and have a conversation, how would they do that?
Yeah, the best way to do that is you can go to our website, myprivatevista.com. On our homepage, there's a contact us button. You can put your information in there. Please reference this episode. If you have a preference, you want to talk to Delaney, put that in there. You can also call us at 312-831-4370, and our receptionist can direct you to Delaney as well.
That's fantastic. The other thing you can do if you're listening to this podcast for the first time is you can become a subscriber. Reach out and hit the follow button. That way, when Nicole drops a new episode of her podcast, you will be automatically notified and you can give it a listen. I would also ask that if you find this podcast valuable and interesting, that you tell people about it. Word of mouth is deeply appreciated. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker, and on behalf of Nicole and everybody at My Private Vista, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen today and remind you that today is your opportunity to go out and make it a great day. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Dollars and Cents Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, sponsored by Private Vista. Visit our website at www.myprivatevista.com or give us a call at 312-831-4370. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Private Vista is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is neither indicative nor a guarantee of future results. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data or other information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analyses, prices, or other data or information contained in this presentation is provided as general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties expressed or implied as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions, or results obtained from the use of this information. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC assume no liability for action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to this information. The information is provided as of the date referenced. Such data and other information are subject to changes without notice. This was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates.